Yes, it works. So good morning, everybody. And so we are going to start the lecture number 2 on quantum fluids of light. So what I would like to talk about today, now that we know what these cavity polaritons are and what dispersion they have and what kind of properties they have, what we want now is to describe polariton condensation. So how we can trigger polariton condensation, how we can measure this condensate, and how they differ from atomic condensate, how they differ from regular lasers. So try to discuss a bit this. And this I will highlight by choosing some particular experiments that I would like to show you. And then, so what we will see is that to trigger this condensation, we pump the system non-resonantly, so incoherently, and so spontaneous coherence appears in the system. What we will see is that the specificity of the system is that it remains really out of equilibrium, and there is always a cloud of uncondensed excitons which are still there and which strongly affects the properties of the condensate. So to really address superfluidity and hydrodynamics of this condensate, a much more simpler way of exciting these fluids is to use resonant pumping. So then in the second part of the talk, I will describe experiments where we resonantly drive and so inject a coherent polariton field and see how these polaritons can flow across defects and how we can generate vortices or solitons and manipulate these solitons. So this will be a second part of the talk with a slightly different excitation scheme. So this is the outline of the talk. So first polariton condensation and then polariton superfluidity. Okay? Okay. So first, how do we generate a polariton condensate in these systems? So the way we do that is by doing optical pumping, but with a laser which is highly detuned with respect to the lower polariton branch. So the scale actually is not correct. So typically here, this dip in K-space is of the order of a few 10 millieV, and this laser lies 100 MeV above the lower branch, so more like on the second floor of this building. So what we do is we create high energy electron hole pairs which are going to relax down to lower energy states by emitting halophonons. So this is a very, very fast thermalization process. And so the excitons will essentially populate this region in K-space, which is very flat, which has a very high density of states. So we will have a very large population of excitons there. And then what we would like is to have excitons relax down to into this trap in K-space and populate the lowest energy polariton states. So there is like a balance between the relaxation rate and the losses, which are essentially dominated by the photon escape from the cavity. So if we manage to have a relaxation which is efficient enough so that the population here at k equals 0 starts to become larger than unity, then we can have bosonic stimulation of the relaxation mechanism. So the relaxation will be accelerated and the rate is going to be proportional to f plus 1, f being the occupation of the states close to k equals 0. And so eventually, if this mechanism is efficient enough, we will observe an exponential increase of the population at k equals 0, so massive occupation of the lowest energy states, and then spontaneous coherence will emerge from the system. So this is actually what was published in this paper that I've shown you already. So this is the lowest part of the figure. So what you see is that they probe the dispersion and the population of polariton along the dispersion. And as they increase the power, what they see is that indeed they observe a very, very large population at k equals 0. So this is the polariton condensate. And so here in this plot, what you see is the population, so in color, in three dimensions, as a function of kx and ky. So kx and ky equal to 0 is the center, and as you move away from the center, you increase the kinetic energy. So this is exactly the same measurement as the cold atom the experiment with rubidium atom that we discussed earlier. So these first experiments were done in samples grown on a different semiconductor than the one I'm going to use. So these are 2-6 cavities, in which polariton relaxation is quite efficient, and this is why they managed to observe condensation for the first time. But this system is extremely disordered, much less control, in particular for the etching. So actually, almost nobody is now using these samples anymore. So this is how the picture looked, so in real space. So this is an image of the emission in real space. So you see the dimension, the spot is of the order of 30 micron, and this is what they measure above threshold. So you see that it's not an homogeneous condensate, it's really fragmented, and the explanation was that there is a lot of disorder, and so polaritons get trapped in some potential minima. So actually, if you move the sample below the excitation spot, these bright spots will follow, will move with the sample because they are attached to the disorder. So what they did to show that something interesting is going on is they probed the spatial coherence of their sample. And so to do that, they took this image of the emission, they sent it to an interferometer, so they split it in two. So one image is here, and the other is tilted. So you see that, and then the two images are recombined. And so what you see is that you actually, so changing the size of one of the arms of the interferometer, you probe the relative coherence of points which are symmetrically positioned with respect to the center of the image. Okay? And so here what they show in blue in the color scale is the amplitude of the fringe they measure when they scan the length of one of the arms as a function of position on the sample. And so what you see is that below threshold, they see fringes only when they probe the spatial coherence on a very, very tiny scale. And essentially, there is absolutely no coherence between points which are here and here below threshold. So you have really incoherent emission. And when you go above threshold, you see that there are regions where you see strong contrast, really fringes with a large amplitude, which show that you have indeed spatial coherence, spontaneous spatial coherence between points which are quite far from each other. So this was the first indication that you have such a condensate. So what I would like to address here is actually the differences and why these condensates are interesting with respect to atomic condensate, and also what is the difference between this system and the regular vertical cavity laser, which is one of the very big debates that occurred immediately after publication of these papers. So essentially, I would like to discuss the fact that here the system is really out of equilibrium, which means, for example, that condensation can occur in excited states. So you can create a highly occupied polariton condensation in states which are absolutely not the lowest energy states, which is really a clear indication that the system is out of equilibrium, and which can be very interesting for some experiments. And then there is also a very important feature. It is the fact that even when you have this high population at low energy in the polariton branch, you still have almost 90% of your excitations which are in the excitonic reservoir. So there is really a huge population of excitons in the reservoir. And as I told you, there are exciton-exciton interaction. So polariton will interact with these excitons and will be very sensitive to the presence of these high energy excitons. So I will show you that we can actually use this interaction with the reservoir to manipulate polariton condensate. And this is something which many groups are now doing today. And I will also show you that there is another effect of the reservoir that we actually became aware of only very recently. And this is the fact that it's a source of instability. And that actually, if you don't pay attention to that, your condensate is not stable and will fragment and be very poorly coherent. So these are the two things that I would like to discuss. So how do we describe in mean field such experiment where we populate an excitonic reservoir, and we have a polariton condensate, a mod, which is highly occupied. So we use this Ginzburg-Landau equation, which is also the non-linear Schrödinger equation or generalized Grosby-Tayevsky, depending on where you come from. So it's an equation which looks like a Schrödinger equation. So let's first neglect this term and this term. What you see is that you have kinetic energy. You may have some static potential, depending whether you are in a lattice or what really is the experiment you do. And what you see here is that there is also a term which is real in this equation and which comes from the reservoir. And it describes the interaction between our polariton and the excitonic cloud. And this interaction is essentially repulsive, which means that it gives rise to a blue shift. And it depends on the population of the reservoir, which can depend on space and time. So if you do a pulse experiment, the reservoir will be populated and then will decay. If you do a steady state experiment, the reservoir will have a time-independent distribution, but can be more have a higher population under your excitation spot, and then a much smaller distribution if you go away from your excitation spot. So you see that the excitonic reservoir is somehow a way to create a potential for your polariton states. So then, in this equation, there is an imaginary term which describes gain and loss. So the loss are the lifetime of polariton, which is dominated by the photon escape, and the gain is the population, so describe the scattering of polariton from the excitonic reservoir. So you see that we have a coupled equation describing the population of the reservoir, which is pumped by the non-resonant scheme. The reservoir can decay in leaky modes, and then the reservoir can decay because it populates the polariton condensate. So you have these two coupled equations that you can compute, and what you find is that as soon as the gain overcomes the loss, you can trigger condensation in your polariton. So you see the way I choose my words is on purpose. It really shows you that we have actually really the equation of a laser. It's the same, except the option is different. It's not stimulated emission of light that will be bosonically stimulated. It's the scattering from an excitonic reservoir into a given polariton state. But otherwise, it's really a balance between gain and loss. And if you have several modes, you can define the gain, so the relaxation rate into each of these modes. And the first one, which will condense, which lays, is the one where which will reach transparency, which is gain overcome exactly compensating for the loss for the first time. Okay, so you can have condensation in high energy state. You can have mode competition. So somehow all the physics that you have in the laser, you will find it. Okay, so now if you condensate in the lowest energy state, you can find that actually close to k equals 0, there is like an effective temperature, which is actually debated also. What is the meaning of that? But you can say that you have like a Boltzmann tail. This is what people have shown at the beginning. So somehow it may be legitimate to call it a PC. But still, we are out of equilibrium. There is always this reservoir. So the system is a bit more complicated. Okay? Now, this pumping is the non-resonant pumping, this pumping. So that will populate so it's not a driving of a coherent drive of the lower branch. It's like an incoherent drive of the reservoir. Okay, so we just describe the population of the reservoir like a black box, and it's incoherent. Sorry? So we are somehow describing the fact that we create high energy electron hole pair that relax and populate this excitonic reservoir. We treat that as a black box. We just say we incoherently inject an exciton population, because in this relaxation mechanism, we lose track of coherence, we lose track of polarization of the excitation, we just incoherently pump the excitonic reservoir. Okay, so it's the easiest way to describe this mechanism. Okay. So that's a very good question. So for example, in 2-6 samples, exciton-phonon interaction is very efficient. And so actually they relax emitting phonons. In gallium arsenide, halophonons, they have an energy of 36 MeV, which is too high with respect to this change in energy. So the only way you can interact with phonons is with acoustic phonons, but their dispersion is extremely flat compared to this. So there is a phase mismatch. So you cannot conserve K and energy. So phonon scattering is very inefficient. So actually, you need really multiple phonon scattering to go down to this K equals 0 state. So there is a phonon bottleneck, which I mentioned before. And so at early times, when we tried to do this condensation, relaxation was so inefficient that there was no way we could reach condensation. So the second mechanism that is efficient to do that is exciton-exciton scattering. So you take two excitons, one will go to higher energy and then eventually relax emitting phonon. The other one will go down to K equals 0. So to do that, you need to pump high enough to have efficient exciton-exciton scattering, which, for example, with just one quantum well, you don't manage. You actually, because exciton, they are quasi-bosons. If you put too many of them, you reach what is called the mode density, and you just go into you reach your excitons, you go into just uncorrelated electron-hole pairs. So what we saw actually at the early times is that when we wanted to pump higher the sample to get efficient exciton-exciton interaction, we were losing the strong coupling regime and just lasing regularly, like in the weak coupling regime, like regular laser. So then we had really to put many quantum wells in the sample, which allows to increase the mode density and eventually reach condensation. So this was like 10 years of work trying to understand how it goes, and this is how we managed to do that. So we think that the mechanism is really exciton-exciton scattering. Okay? So there is no emission of terahertz light. Yes. It could do that if, for example, you pump like exactly one halophone above the polariton, but then you are in the stop band, so light does not enter. So you actually lose the coherence. So what you can do is pump with circular polarization. And there are some reports saying that if you pump with circular polarization, you have some a very small amount of circular polarization in your reservoir. And then you can trigger condensation in sigma plus. But the polarization is quite weak, so it has not been reproduced in many labs. So if you want to address coherence and control the coherence, you better go to resonant pumping, then you are sure of what you do. Okay? So what I've chosen to do is to show you some of the experiments we have done over the year in 1D samples, for example. So I would like to show you a first experiment so I've shown you already how we can pattern cavity to 1D structures and have nicely resolved 1D subbands. So quite a long time ago, with one of my students, we tried to just see how condensation would occur in a 1D system. So to excite just a single wire, we use the microscope objective to focus the laser beam in a small region. The simplest way was not to use an elliptical laser. First, we just focused the laser beam in a small region of a few microns compared to the total length of the wire, which is typically 200 microns. So we just increased the excitation threshold, the power, and then saw a nice threshold. So you see the density grows very fast with the power, and we form the condensate. And then what we found is that actually looking just with the regular camera, is that suddenly the wire would emit a lot of light, and not only in the excitation spot, but actually over the entire wire. So we really saw that light was very strong and propagating along the entire wire. So how can we understand this? It's very easy once you have understood everything. Actually, what we did is we locally excite the sample, so we inject a lot of excitons in the structure, but excitons, they have a very heavy mass, and they cannot propagate fast, they get trapped in disorder, so they stay in the region of the excitation, and as we have discussed before, this excitonic reservoir creates a local blue shift because of this repulsive interaction. So what we do in this experiment, we create a condensate at k equals 0, but on top of a little hill like this, and so particles do not want to stay there. They can just escape the excitation spot, converting this interaction energy into kinetic energy. And this is what we can directly measure looking at the distribution in k-space of the different regions of the wire. So if we spatially select just the region of the excitation and then look at the Fourier plane, what we find is that we have indeed a polariton condensate at k equals 0, which is blue shifted by an energy which corresponds to the interaction with the reservoir. So now what we can do is just select, for example, the left part of the wire and again look at k-space. And what we directly see is that indeed we have a polariton flow, which is at the same energy than under the excitation spot, but with a finite k. And we have the opposite situation in the other direction. So we have really a coherent polariton flow which escaped from the excitation spot. And what you can see on the top part of the image is the higher energy emission, and it's magnified by a factor of 20 because it's very weak. And what you see is the emission of exciton at higher energy, which stays localized under the excitation spot. So what we did then is to perform a so-called Young slit interferometry experiment where we select the emission from the two ends of the wire, recombine them and look at their mutual coherence. And what we found is very beautiful fringes. So it means that we have spontaneous coherence which occurs here, and then this coherent polariton, they propagate in this kind of waveguide and they stay fully coherent. So this is really a ballistic propagation. So once we have that, I want to show you this experiment, which is very nice. When you approach your excitation spot close to the end of the wire. So the end of the wire acts as a midfield barrier for polaritons. And so what you see directly is that you have a trap between your excitation spot and the barrier. And so if you look at the emission as a function of position, so this is an image, number A24, that you get on a single click of the CCD camera. You directly visualize this optical trap. You directly see actually the potential induced by the reservoir. So these are the continuum of 1D modes on the left, and here you see the trap modes with the lobes of the wave function. So this is proportional to the square of the wave function. So the mode with one lobe, the fundamental state, two lobes, and so on. And you can, in real life, move your excitation spot and see the trap becoming wider and states becoming more equally spaced, more closely spaced. So this kind of control of the potential landscape with the excitonic reservoir has been then extended in different groups. For example, in the group of Jeremy Baumberg, so they did actually a trap in between two spots, so they really fully control the potential landscape by optical means. And more recently, it has been studied, and it is currently studied by the group of Pavlos Lapidakis in Southampton, together with Natalia Berloff. And what they do is they use many excitation spots. They create many condensate on top of these spots. And what they observe is actually the phase locking of all these dependent condensate. And so what they say is that you can actually, depending whether so there is like a choice, the condensate can phase lock in phase or out of phase. And so they show that this is actually a simulator of an XY Hamiltonian. And so they can actually form hundreds of polariton condensate, in which they can actually observe their mutual phase locking. Okay? So what we did after this one-dimensional experiment is try to actually design optical devices, and like, for example, interferometer. So here I would like to describe you how this Mach-Zehnder interferometer works. So what we do is we inject a coherent polaritone in the input arm. We split this flow in two. And so what we see directly looking at the emission from the top, because polaritons always lose photons on their way, we see directly the interferences which occur inside the sample between polaritons going that way, polaritons going the other way. So then what you would like to do is to control the phase in the two arms. And what we do is we use actually the fact that these polaritons have an excitonic part and interact with excitons. So what we did is inject locally a little excitonic cloud in one of the arms. So this cloud is going to create a blue shift in the region of this control beam. And so when polariton will arrive in this region, the fact that there is some potential energy will reduce their kinetic energy. So polariton will slow down in this region, and as a result, there will be like a phase shift with respect to polariton going in the other arm. And so here I show you different phase fringe patterns obtained for different intensity in the control beam. And what you see is that indeed we can observe a pi-phase shift between the upper and lower arm here, and then 2 pi phase shift, and then 3 pi, and so on. So, and the fact that these interactions are very strong allows us to do this kind of pi-phase shift with quite a very small excitation spot, so just of a few micron size, and so the whole system is actually quite small because of strong interaction. So then we can actually beat the total Mach-Zehnder interferometer and show that when we induce a pi-phase shift, indeed we completely observe destructive interference in the output arm, and there is no output. Okay, so I'm not going to go much into more detail, but there have been a lot of work done on polariton devices, so trying either to use the nonlinearity of the excitonic reservoir or the Kerr nonlinearity of polaritons, so to use bistability, to use speed-dependent interaction to make a speed memory or a speed switch, and so on. So there are several proposals for proof of principle of polariton devices. So of course, one of the main drawbacks of all this is that we are working at low temperature, so for real application, it's not really possible. And so in parallel, there is a lot of effort and very impressive results on pushing the strong coupling regime and the polariton physics to room temperature. So what you need to do this kind of physics at room temperature, you need to have much more robust excitons. So to work with excitons which have a binding energy which is larger than kT at room temperature, which is not the case for gallium arsenide, where the binding energy is of a few 10 millieV or 12 millieV, so smaller than kT at room temperature. So there have been a lot of progress in gallium nitride, also large band gap material like gallium nitride and zinc oxide, where polariton lasing has been actually observed. And recently, there are very interesting work done on organic material or 2D atomic materials. So we will learn more about that on Thursday. And so this is really a field which is progressing. And there are some signs that you may actually have Chi3 nonlinearity, particularly in this material, which then open the way to doing all the physics of what we are doing, but at room temperature. And very recently, I will show you a paper where superfluidity of polariton is observed at room temperature, which is, I think, a very important milestone. Okay, so you can also find this review paper where Sambito and Kina Cohen, so the author of this superfluidity paper at room temperature, try to design the road toward maybe realistic polariton devices. Okay, so then I would like to address more fundamental properties of this condensate, which is their stability. So it is well known from atomic physics that if you deal with bosons which have attractive interaction, they will tend to just collapse to be attracted in a single position. And so actually what you expect is to have the collapse and actually the explosion of condensate. And this has been demonstrated in atomic condensate, the fact that you cannot preserve a localized condensate because attractive interaction destabilize the system. So the question whether this physics could apply to polariton has been raised actually quite a long time ago, where a spin-dependent interaction was discussed. So I showed you that, so here in this paper they call alpha 1 the interaction with polariton with parallel spin, and alpha 2 with opposite spin. And so depending, so for example, if you have alpha 2 equals 0, so you neglect polariton interaction between opposite spins, you see that depending on the sign of the interaction, so if alpha is positive, so a repulsive interaction, you obtain a BC, and if alpha is negative, you obtain just the collapse of the BC. But depending on the balance between the two, you have this phase diagram, and so you expect to see different kind of polarization for the condensate and different regions where the polariton are not stable. And so, as we discussed already yesterday, there is a paper from the group of Benoît Deveau where they observed the bi-excitant Feshbach resonance, so they are able to tune alpha 2, so not a lot, but slightly. So this may be a way to try to actually explore this phase diagram. But so as I told you, when you do a non-resonant excitation, you are actually governed by the interaction with the reservoir. So essentially this term, and this term is repulsive. So you may expect to always get stable condensate. But this is actually not true, and you can see that very easily if you consider a steady state regime. So you are going to put all this time derivative to 0, and what is called an adiabatic approximation, which means that the reservoir is able to follow instantaneously the change in population of the condensate. So the two, there is no retardation between the two. There is an instantaneous response of both the condensate and the repulsive to any change of density in the system. So if you do that, you can very easily show that the reservoir density can be written like this, and if you reinject that in the Gross-Pytalevsky equation, you end up writing an effective interaction between polariton, which is dressed by the excitonic reservoir. And what you find is that depending on the power, this effective interaction can become negative. And so what you find is that actually for small excitation power, you have attractive interaction. And for larger interactions, so there is a power above which you get effective repulsive interaction. So actually what you expect is that, so you have a phase diagram. So here you have the difference between gamma, the polariton line width, and gamma R, the reservoir line width. So you have somehow the balance between the reservoir decay and the polariton decay, and the power as a function of power. And you see that depending on where you are, you expect actually to observe some region where there is no stability. And actually in most, so the way you can understand this physically, it's exactly analog to the spectral hole burning that you have in lasers. So imagine that you have in some region, because of noise, because of fluctuation, imagine that you have somehow a dip in the reservoir population locally. So since there is a repulsive interaction with the excitonic reservoir, a dip in the reservoir will be an attractive potential. So you will then have more polariton that will come into this dip, and this will further trigger stimulated relaxation, so you will dig further the dip. So there is like a positive feedback, which means that all the fluctuations are amplified. Okay, and this tends to actually fragmentate your reservoir and creates huge instability in the system. So it was actually a question that we asked to our ourselves is why this has not been observed before, because polariton condensate have been observed in 2006, 2010, so it's quite a long time ago. Why instability was not observed by anybody? And this is essentially because most of the samples that were used, the lifetime of polariton was not long enough. And so we were in this region. In this region where above threshold you are in the unstable regime, and you would need to pump very hard to try to reach the stable regime, and most of the time you cannot do that because you bleach the strong coupling regime before that. So still, so we should all be in this regime, and why nobody saw that? This is because most of the people, and in particular in the experiment I've shown you before, most of the people use very small excitation spots. So there is like a confinement within the spot. So like this confinement energy competes with instability, and you can show that if you use small excitation spot, the instability disappears. So most of the people were actually in this region, but because of the small excitation spot, you don't see the instability. Gamma is just the polariton lifetime. So it's, as I showed you, it's somehow the photon fraction times gamma photon plus exciton fraction times gamma exciton, the excitoning part of the quartz. Analytical derivation. For the photon lifetime, you can find an analytical derivation, which is just given by the index contrast in the mirror, the number of pairs. So you have actually an analytical expression, which I cannot write you by heart, but I can show you later, which tells you what is the reflectivity of your mirror, and then the lifetime is just directly related to the reflectivity of the two mirrors. Sorry? That is, so, but then they propagate, so they are in a different mode. Yes, and this is, I'm talking about so they propagate and they come in the region where there is no reservoir. What I'm saying is what happens in the region where there is this reservoir. And why we wanted to do that is because we wanted to look at the decay of the spatial coherence. There are very interesting physical things like KPZ physics, which has been predicted by Sebastian Thiel. I don't know where he is. He's not here. And so we wanted to make a large excitation spot and look at the decay of the coherence. And we found out that we cannot do large excitation spot because when we do that, it's a real mess inside the excitation spot. So that is what I'm going to show you. So there has been some indication of instability in a recent paper in organic samples, but under pulsed excitation. So what I would like to show you is some experiments where we try to observe to see how polariton evolved when we make a large excitation spot. And we did that both in 2D and 1D, and we did that both for moderate Q factor and quite high Q factor, so to see if there is a way to obtain stable condensate. So what we did is exactly the same experiment that we did in 2010, but now the only difference is that we take a long, very long excitation spot, almost 100 micron. Okay, and we look at condensation. So what we see again is a nice condensate, which is at k equals 0. But now when we look in real space, that is what we observe. So it's a mess. There is no way we can take rid of that. There are like very strong inhomogeneity in the intensity. And when we do the spatial coherence, what we find is that you see so we interfere the image with its symmetric. And you see that there is spatial coherence only on a few microns, and there the visibility is terrible. Okay, so this is the summary of this experiment. The excitation spot is very big, the condensate is really messy, and the spatial coherence is really localized. So then we tried a higher Q sample, and we observed even more fragmented polaritons. And again, the spatial coherence is quite big, but only localized on the bright spot, and there is no mutual coherence between independent bright spots. And we did the same on 2D samples. So this is an image of the condensate in 2D. with the coherence, which is really localized again, much more localized than the condensate. And this is what we obtain in higher Q sample. And I know that people have done the same experiment in even higher Q sample, and it's a mess. So we really see fragmented condensate, so really a strong signature of instability. So then we worked with our colleagues, theoreticians, so Michiel Bouters and Jacopo Carusotto. So first they calculated the excitation spectrum of the system, considering just an homogeneous excitation spot. And what they found is that indeed we are in a region where there is this branch of excitation with positive imaginary parts, so which is amplification. And so it means that the system is unstable. All fluctuations are amplified, and there is no way we can observe a stable regime. And these are simulations. So here they compute really the two-coupled equation, putting realistic parameters, taking into account the shape of our Gaussian beams. And so this is the evolution of the polariton density as a function of time. So what you see is that actually there is a chaotic behavior with high intensity region which just propagate around the sample. And so what we do in our experiment is we integrate over all this dynamical regime. And so at the end, we end up with very, very low coherence, small coherence lengths. And so these are some calculations they did, including disorder, because actually what you have here is that this fluctuation, they get pinned into the disorder. Okay, and so this bright spot, they also follow the sample if you move your sample, and this is just, so you just reveal the potential landscape, the disorder landscape of your sample. And this occurs whatever the length scale of your potential, your disorder. So this is quite a bad news for our polariton condensate. And so we tried to find a solution, and actually we find the solution by accident, actually, working with lattices and having bands with negative mass. We systematically observed that when we work and condense on top of a negative mass band, we have beautiful images of condensate, which looks like a PowerPoint actually drawing. So very homogeneous, very extended, and this is really systematic. So actually, we came out with the idea that indeed, if you work with a negative mass, so you change the effect of the sign of interaction. So actually, where you expect an unstable phase, you will get a stable condensate, and the opposite. So actually, the stability analysis is completely reversed. So as I already showed you, one of our really of the business we do every day is to engineer lattices. And so you see that, for example, here we have bands which are parabolic, but their curvature is inverse, and they define an effective mass which is negative. And it's possible to change the exciton-photon detuning so that the gain is maximum on this part of the band structure, so that you trigger condensation on top of these bands. So we did that, for example, on this lattice, which was engineered especially to have a negative mass, which absolute value is exactly the same as the wire with positive mass that I was showing you before. So we just changed the sign of the mass, but the absolute value is the same. So the way you can average disorder is the same. It's not a question of disorder averaging. And so what you find is that you can trigger condensation in K-space. You see, this is really at the center of the second mini-Brillouin zone at K equal. So it's equivalent to K equals 0, but here the branch is dark because of interference effect. So you condense here, and what you find in the real space, so what you see are the pillars, but you see that the envelope is quite homogeneous. So this is the summary. So you see the signal, so the envelope of the condensate is like this, and you see that the spatial coherence is much more extended than the condensate itself. And the theory tells you that you are indeed in a stable regime, and that the coherence is indeed much higher, much more long range. So we did the same on the honeycomb lattice. It's possible to trigger condensation here. And so here, this is the fringe pattern we observe. And we can zoom, and you see that we have really nice contrast everywhere. So we have really all the pillars which are in phase, which are emitting coherently all together. And so this is the image we observe. So this plot is here. There is no signal because we are in the hole of the honeycomb lattice. So this is the envelope, and you see that the coherence is really high. Okay, so what I showed you is that the excitonic reservoir can be used as a tool to manipulate this condensate, to engineer the potential landscape in a controlled way. You can also engineer a disorder landscape, just using a speckle from a laser. You can also introduce a controlled disorder in your sample. So this could be done to probe, for example, Anderson localization or any kind of propagation. And what I showed you also is that it is a very important ingredient in our system, this excitonic reservoir, and it's a source of instability. So there is no way, if you want to look at long-range order, you really need to stabilize the condensate, otherwise you will be completely governed by this instability. Okay, so now we discussed a lot with Sebastian Diel, and I think I see him. He's now including the excitonic reservoir and this instability. So this is really an open question, what remains from this kind of physics when you introduce the instability. So if there are no questions, I'm going to move to the second part of the talk, which is very different. We are going to resonantly pump, so inject coherence, control interaction by the laser detuning, and look at polariton flow on the sample. So how you look at the polariton flow, you can just look in real space and monitor the polariton, or in reciprocal space also. So with these tools, and you can use interferometry to look at the phase. So with this tool, you can really directly address superfluidity. So the idea comes from this very well-known theory of superfluidity. The idea is that you consider this Gauss-Pitayevsky equation, and so if you neglect interaction, so we have this parabolic dispersion of your condensate, which can be atomic condensate or polariton condensate. Then if the polariton moves, you have to change referential, and what you see is that so you have a large population, some population of polaritons which you inject, which have a given K, and what you know is that they can be scattered to any states which are at the same energy. So this is a circle, the elastic circle. You can have scattering. So in real space, so what you do to do this experiment, you consider a polariton flow, and in real space you put a defect. So in the experiments we will find some native defect in the cavity, and you look how the flow changes because of the presence of this defect. So when polariton reaches this region and gets scattered by elastically scattered by the defect, they will populate this elastic circle, and you will see fringes in real space. Okay. Now, if you consider this interaction, so you increase the polariton field, and you start to have a strong, a strong interaction energy, then you can calculate. So you can calculate the excitation spectrum of your system, and show that the excitation spectrum gets linearized, and so you define actually the speed of sound for your polariton excitation. So you can create in your system some polariton waves, which will propagate with a speed which defines the speed of this polariton sound. And so now if you consider a highly populated state but at a finite K, what you can show is that the dispersion is changed that way. And what you can see is that there are no states anymore available at the same energy than your polariton. So there is no way you can scatter polariton, which means that polariton will flow straight and will not be sensitive to the defect. This is polariton superfluidity, and so in real space, you expect to see this kind of pattern. Okay, and then it can be also shown. So this discussion has been done by Cristiano Ciuti and Jacopo Carosotto in this beautiful paper, and they showed also that if you, so this regime occurs when the fluid is propagating at a sound which is smaller than the speed of sound. So it's a subsonic fluid, and then in this case you are in the superfluid regime. When you are in the supersonic regime, so kinetic energy is larger than interaction energy, and the speed of your fluid is larger than the speed of sound, then the dispersion is changed, but you see that you recover states at the same energy, so scattering is possible again. But the fringes look a bit different, and in particular, you have this cone, which is very specific from the so-called Cherenkov energy, and so it's a characteristic of this mechanism where you have scattering, but you are in a nonlinear supersonic fluid. Okay? So this was a proposal by Jacopo Causotto and Cristiano Ciuti, and then there was a beautiful experiments which were carried out by Alberto Amo in the group of Alberto Bramati and Elisabeth Giacomino. So what they did is to coherently pump a given polariton state. So they control the speed of this polariton, they control the energy and the interaction energy. And so to describe this experiment, you have to consider this nonlinear equation where you take this coherent drive. So Fp is the amplitude of the pump, and Kp is the wave vector of the pump, omega p is the frequency of the pump. And so what they did is they send this polariton flow, and in transmission, they look at the emission in real space and reciprocal space as a function of interaction energy and kinetic energy. So they found a defect somewhere in the cavities. Our cavities are nice, but they are never completely perfect. And so they send the polariton flow, and so look at the real space image, and so the flow is like this, and what you see are these fringes, which are very characteristic of this scattering mechanism. And now when they increase the density, and they work with the fluid flow which is smaller than the speed of sound, what they observe is the complete disappearance of these fringes in the region of the defect. Okay, so this is the signature of the superfluidity. And then working at higher power and increasing the speed of the fluid, they could also observe this nonlinear scattering regime with this cone, which is really typical from this Cherenkov effect and the supersonic regime. Okay. So what Simon Pigeon in the group of Cristiano Ciuti realized after this first experiment is that actually in the vicinity of the defect, you have a very large change of velocity, and actually close to the defect, the velocity of the fluid can be almost twice as large as the initial velocity, which means that even if the flow is below, so the overall flow occurs below the speed of sound, locally you can have a speed of the fluid which is larger than the speed of sound. And this is responsible for the nucleation of vortices in the wake of the fluid. So they tried actually to observe this, and to do that they did actually a different experiment, because here, since you create your fluids actually everywhere, you impose the phase of your fluid with the laser, and this prevents the formation of this phase defect. So to do that, to observe this nucleation, I'm missing, where is my, voilà, sorry. So to observe this kind of nucleation of vortices and to observe this kind of turbulence in the wake of the defect, what they did is they excite the sample, but only above this red line. So they let the flow evolve freely. So the laser is cut. So there is excitation above the red line, and there are no excitation below. So the fluid is free to evolve, and the phase is free to evolve. And so what they observe, so this is the superfluid regime. So you see that there are no interference, and the phase is very homogeneous. So here it's the visibility of the fringes, and it's very homogeneous. But then when they bit the fluid, the speed of the fluid, what they observe is that actually, so you have nice fringes here, but in the wake of the wake of the back of the defect, you see that there are weird things, and actually you see that the fringe contrast is very, very poor in this region. So there are regions, dark region, where you don't see interference. So it's as if the phase was moving around. So this phase pattern is obtained by interfering the emission of polariton with the driving laser. Okay, so this is a reference for the phase. And what you see is that in this region, it's as if there was no coherence anymore. So the way to understand that is that indeed you create vortices, and these vortices, they move along these lines, so they are taken by the fluids. And so when you do a measurement which is average over time, you don't see anything anymore. So there are people in this group, so here these are an experiment by the group of Benoît Deveau in Lausanne, and there is also an experiment in the group of Sanvito, where they did a pulse experiment, and they tried to look at these vortices in real time. So it's an experiment which is a bit complicated, so just follow me. So here this is the picture, the real space image. There is a defect here, and the flow is that way. Okay, so the polaritons arrive from the left, and so here this is just the density, intensity in real space, and here we look at the phase. Here this is the fringe pattern. And so so here you see the images for different time delay. So here this is 1.3 picosecond after the laser pulse, 3.7, 4.7, 9.3, and so on. So time goes like this. And what they observe is some dips in the intensity. And actually here you see nicely in the phase image that you have the nucleation of pairs of solitons which rotate in opposite direction and which are just expelled from with the fluids. Okay, so in the time-integrated experiments, we don't see that. We just see that the phase is blurred in this region. But if you are able to time resolve the experiment, you see this. So actually, it's a bit more complicated than that because the nucleation of vortices is random, and these experiments are averaged over, I don't know, 1 million of realization to have enough signal. So you need somehow to have some potential which actually drive your solitons so that one image after the other, there are some events which repeat in the same way so that at the end you can see them. Okay, so the image is actually, the system is much more complicated, and thanks to this order, we are able to see something because we cannot do single shot experiment at least in this kind of, with this kind of detectors. Okay, and then what they found also is that when you pump even higher, so you give more kinetic energy to the system, what you find is that indeed you again recover very nice visibility of the fringes. And actually what you have in this region where the visibility was blurred, now you have a very nice pi phase shift of the phase between the region inside and the region outside. And these are actually dark solitons. So this is another experiment where the dark soliton is clearly visible. So what you form is really a phase defect, which is a dark soliton, which corresponds to the pi phase shift of the polariton field between inner and outer side. Okay? And so this was perfectly nicely reproduced and actually predicted by Simon Pigeon, the fact that you go from a superfluid regime to a regime where you randomly nucleate a vortex pair, and then all this organized nicely into individual dark solitons. Okay? So I have a lot of time. I'm going to finish before. So we actually found recently a nice way. So what I showed you before is that these solitons, they nucleate because of some disorder, some defect which is positioned in the polariton flow. We found recently another way to generate a polariton train of solitons, which is fully controlled and does not require any defect. And this experiment was done injecting resonantly, so driving coherently, two counter-propagating polariton flow. Okay, so we take a wire, like the one I showed you before, and we inject two counter-propagating polariton field, and we can control the intensity of this polariton field and the wave vector and everything, just tuning the laser beams. So when we do that at low power, so in the linear regime, so what we are actually doing is injecting photons, coherent photons, which propagate that way, and coherent photons, which propagate that way. So we expect to see just a fringe pattern, the establishment of a standing wave, because we have interferences between the two photons field and photon flow. So this is just, we have two plane wave, two propagating wave which interfere. And when we change the phase, the relative phase between the two, we shift continuously the fringe pattern. There is nothing interesting, it's completely normal. What is more striking is that if we increase the power, we immediately see that we don't have just photons, we have really interacting photons, and they actually spawn. So what we see is that the flow of polariton between the two spots reorganize into actually a flat region, two flat regions, and two dips, which are actually two dark solitons. So we can show that there is indeed a pi phase shift between the two, and so this is a non-linear mechanism, and so you see that you don't have just regular photons, but it's really highly interacting, highly non-linear photons which you propagate in your waveguide. And what is really striking is that the appearance of this dark soliton is really abrupt. So this is the emission pattern we observe in real space as a function of power. So at low power, we have this just regular linear standing wave. And you see that suddenly above a certain power, here we form four dark solitons. And then suddenly above another critical power, we expulse two solitons and get just, we get two solitons. So here in this region, we have only two solitons. And if we would further increase the power, we would just get a flat profile. So it's really highly nonlinear, and it's fully reproduced by the calculation. And somehow, the hand-waving way to understand this is that so somehow the laser imposes the chemical potential of the system, and the energy is the sum of an interaction energy, which is due to this Chi3 nonlinearity, and a kinetic energy, which is very strong in the region where the polariton intensity changes a lot. And so somehow, when you increase the polariton density, eventually the system will fully convert the kinetic energy of individual soliton into interaction energy, and so you will recover a flat. Okay, so you expel. So these are really quantized excitation. And so what you can do to get a stable solution is just to expulse abruptly an entire soliton and convert this kinetic energy into interaction energy. And so this happens when you inject enough polariton in your system. So you have really a balance between kinetic energy and interaction energy, and some solutions are stable and some are not. Okay, so here, when you cross this border, the 4-soliton solution is not stable, and the 2-soliton solution is stable. Okay? So here what you see is that we have only an odd number of solitons. We can expel soliton just 2 by 2, because with the boundary condition that we impose with our laser beam, we impose that the phase difference between the two is 0. So we have a symmetric boundary condition, and this imposes that the pattern is symmetric. So that's why we always keep the parity constant. Okay, so we can also impose a phase difference equal of pi between the two POM beam, and in that case we observe 1 soliton, 3 solitons, so an odd number of solitons, and again we eject them by pairs. Okay, and what is very interesting is that we can then sweep the phase difference between the two beam. So, and then what we see is that we are going to evolve from an odd even number of solitons to an odd number of solitons, and this occurs also abruptly. You see that here there is a phase difference which corresponds to the abrupt expulsion of one soliton. And so this is also a very highly nonlinear system which is controlled by the phase difference. And actually when you sweep the phase up and down, what you observe is some bistability in the phase number. It's not a bistability induced by the power of your field. We work at constant power. It's a bistability which is governed by the phase difference between these two laser beams. So you really see directly that we have a highly nonlinear fluids, and that indeed this is not just regular photons, but photons dressed by excitons and giving rise to this Chi3 nonlinearity. So we have a preliminary calculation which show that if you actually excite these soliton trains, they have very interesting excitation, which seems to be extremely long lasting. So we are finalizing this calculation and trying to see if we could observe this experimentally. So to finish, I'm a bit in advance. We will go for lunch earlier. So I would just like to advertise some work that is done by our colleagues. So for example, in the book of Alberto Bramati. So again, trying to manipulate in an interesting way these fluids and trying to generate vortex lattices. And so in this experiment, what they did, so they coherently drove their polaritons resonantly, but they use a Lagergauss beam. So trying to inject some angular momentum into the fluids. So what they did is they used both a Lagergauss beam, so to inject here an L equal 8 angular momentum, and at the same time, at the center, they had a Gaussian beam of L equals 0. So the potential is somehow you have this this Lagergauss beam plus a little hill of potential in the center. So there is like a ring. And so what they want is somehow do the same kind of experiment that was done with BEC. So turning the potential, or with liquid helium, turning the box in which the liquid helium stays, and try to generate vortices. Okay? And so this is what they observe, is that indeed they are able, so even in the linear regime, actually, they are able to observe a ring of vortices, and then when they increase the instability, there is actually when they increase the intensity, they show that there is a phase instability and the generation of vortex and anti-vortex pairs. So they try now to try to control this and try to observe some order in this vortex and anti-vortex pairs, which is not so easy. So this is really ongoing work. And then to finish, I would like to show you, so just to mention this paper, which was published last June, where they demonstrated, so Daniele Sampito, together with Stefan Skena-Cohen, who did these experiments on organic cavities. So here they take an organic cavity with extremely robust excitons at room temperature under pulse excitation, because CW destroys your sample if you want to put a high enough density of polariton. But nevertheless, they could observe the disappearance of the scattering. So you see here the elastic circle, the experiment, and the collapse of this elastic circle in K-space, so showing some hint of superfluidity. So it seems that all this physics could be developed at room temperature, and this is good news for the field, I think. And so with this, I would like to conclude. So what I've showed you today is that this excitonic reservoir plays a very important role. It can actually destroy the stability of our condensate, and that doing resonant pumping of the sample, we can really create highly nonlinear fluids of light, which shows superfluidity, vortices, dark solitons. So this is really a nice playground to play with nonlinear fluids. So there are still open questions. Can we manipulate vortex lattices? Can we observe quantum turbulence? And then, is the system interesting to try to do black hole physics? We also went into this physics. So it is possible actually to make an abrupt interface between a region which is subsonic, so which is superfluid, and a region which is supersonic. And so if you have this region which is supersonic and you consider sound which is emitted from here, it will never be able to go backward in the fluid because the fluid is supersonic, so it flows faster than the speed of sound. So this is exactly the analogous of a black hole where light is trapped. So here it's an acoustic black hole and the sound is trapped. So then there are predictions saying that this horizon should emit correlated phonon pairs. So these are excitation of the polariton fluid. And so we may be able to observe quantum correlation between light emitted from this region and light emitted from this region. So what is nice is that here we can look inside the black hole without any difficulty. The main difficulty is that the correlation that are calculated by our friends, so Jacopo Carusoto and co-workers, the correlation are extremely weak, like 10 to the minus 4 or 10 to the minus 5. So it's not clear whether the experiment is feasible. So this is a perspective, but probably very long-term perspective. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention. And if you have questions, most
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. I see you're ready for the question. Then, or that, yeah.
So yes, of course, 2D material are also very promising for condensation. I'm not sure there has been yet any demonstration of polariton condensation. We may wait until Thursday, we will know more. There will be a talk on that. I don't think this has been demonstrated yet. But I mean, I think it's a matter of technological improvement of the cavity finesse. For the moment, the quality factor of their cavity is still too low, probably, so that losses are stronger than the gain, but it may happen. And recently, very, very recently, there have been a report on polariton condensation at room temperature, so polariton lasing, they say, in perovskite material, which are also very new materials, which are very interesting for photovoltaic applications. So there also you have very strong excitons, and they manage to observe polariton lasing. I don't know what about the nonlinearities. So it's really two different questions, having the possibility to have efficient enough relaxation to observe this condensate, and then having Chi3 nonlinearity to be able to play with that. So the problem is that if you have robust excitons, so high binding energy means very small Bohr radius for your excitons. So you have very tightly bound excitons, but very small ones. So you need really to pump very hard to see interaction. Apparently, it's possible in organic material without destroying the material.
So, yes.
Condensate?
Very strongly.
I think you want, I mean, one of the goals is to...
Yes. So, but one of the goals is to, so indeed, there is a lot of work also by the group of Jeremy Baumberg, where they excite the sample non-resonantly with a ring. And so polariton tend to flow inside the ring, and in some experiment, they can form a condensate inside the ring. So what you say is you want to make it smaller and smaller to define a very small trap. So I'm not sure you can, so maybe you can actually indeed make a very small trap. So like a few micron, below 1 micron, I'm not sure it will be possible. But the problem is that this kind of experiment is proposed to make them single polariton experiments. And your reservoir is going to inject many polaritons, and you don't want that because it's going to kill all your single photon properties. So you should avoid any reservoir if you want to really go into the quantum regime. So this is interesting for different kind of experiment. The quantum one, it's not interesting.
Any other question? Here?
For metrology of other things, can you use, is there any metrological advantage of using polariton condensates?
I'm not
Do you
sure
know?
this has been explored yet. I don't. So what they could be, there have been some proposal where they could serve as a sensor. So, for example, you could be look at this phase shift and be sensitive on anything that would be in the surroundings. So this could be very sensitive. The problem is that these polaritons, they have actually the center of the wave packet is really inside the microcavity, and then there is just an evanescent tail at the surface. So there are proposals to try to use a waveguide. You can also have actually polariton with a waveguide, just a regular waveguide, but you put quantum well inside the waveguide and you operate it at room temperature. And then the field is much more intense, and you may use that to fabricate an interferometer and be extremely sensitive to any local change in refractive index at the surface of the material. So this may be interesting. I'm not sure for metrology, I don't know.
Any other question? Sebastian?
In the context of this negative versus positive. Okay, so in the context of negative versus positive mass for the polariton degrees of freedom, you mentioned that negative, or in the positive mass case, the effect of disorder is very pronounced. So in the negative mass case, it didn't seem so important. At least you had nice coherent features. So can you comment on why this is?
So actually, so in the negative mass, what we observe is the formation of this stable. So there is like phase locking of the whole excitation spot, and probably disorder is somehow just average. Whereas when you have this chaotic regime, you form some small region of high intensity, and they get pinned into the disorder. So in between minima of the disorder potential, you have almost no coherence. Things are moving around, and at some point they get pinned into the disorder. And this happens when you have a large Q factor. So when the polariton have enough time to somehow get trapped. In the stable regime, you don't amplify fluctuations. Fluctuations are damped. So even if somewhere you get some accumulation of polaritons because of disorder, this is not going to be amplified. That's the way I understand that, so that at the end you get something homogeneous. So this is probably where some other effects could be searched. Exactly. So I did not talk because I did not want to put too many details, but we looked also at the temporal coherence, and it's very long in these tiny spots. So in this bright spot, the coherence is very long. The same, almost the same that we would get in a single pillar. So somehow polaritons are trapped there and they live happy, but it's really a local region. And instability is probably destroyed by this trapping. You would agree with this picture?
Any other question? Otherwise, we thank again Jacqueline.
And there is one question. Sorry? So we are thinking of sending a polariton flow, for example, into a mask with little holes, And so trying to create some, spontaneous turbulence in the wake of this kind of structure that we could design by etching or maybe just by optical engineering. And then looking at K-space, we should see some power law decay, which are typical of this turbulence. So this is underway. I think this is very interesting.
Okay. I think now we can thank Jacqueline again.